Otherwise on SAFM.
And we're talking women here on SAFM as we do every day between 1 and 2 on Otherwise. Well, Donna McCullum is a life coach and she goes by the name Fairy Godmother. Her story is one of following your gut and believing in your dreams, but most importantly, conquering fear. From the tiny voice of self-doubt in the back of your head to the overwhelming fears which seem to make dreams and visions hard to achieve. Well, Donna joins me in studio today to discuss how to deal with the 7 deadly fears. And if you have any questions, comments, or would like to share with the life coach and Fairy Godmother, the number to call is 0892 10 2010. That's 0892 10 2010. And with her fairy wings on, welcome to the studio. Thanks, Donna.
Thanks, Kim. It's so lovely to be here.
Cool. Well, you're no stranger to Otherwise, but for listeners who don't know, you had an epiphany moment, something you call reinvention, and it had a lot to do with sort of feeling and facing fear itself. So tell us a bit about your journey.
Well, my journey as a fairy godmother started about 6.5 years ago, and I was in my own business, and I sold that business, and I took a sabbatical. I took time off, which I'd highly recommend to anyone to do. Just take some time out to really rediscover who you are. And I went traveling in South America, and I had the most phenomenal trip over 7 months. But 5 months into my trip, I had what can only be described as an epiphany experience on a night bus in Argentina. And I was on this bus traveling through the night, and I suddenly woke up and I had this urge to write. And it was like, I've got to write. And luckily I had my travel journal in my bag, and I started to write. And the words literally just flowed out of me. It was the most phenomenal experience I've ever had in my life. It was just all sorts of things were coming out. And over the course of a few hours, I wrote over 50 pages. It was prolific writing. It was like an incredible cathartic experience. And at the end of it came out 2 little neat paragraphs about the purpose for my life. And it started by saying, I am a fantastically fabulous and magical fairy godmother. And those 2 paragraphs went on to say, in essence, that my big purpose is to help people ignite their dreams and goals and move them through their fears and into their most powerful potential and help them lead extraordinary lives. And so for the last 6.5 years, after having this vision and this night bus in Argentina and this crazy experience, I've been wearing my wings and waving my wand and igniting South Africans and people in the UK and the USA to really discover their full potential, whatever that is.
Fantastic. Okay, well, today we're tackling the 7 deadly fears, I believe. So how did you pinpoint these particular fears, and let's introduce them as well.
Fantastic. So over the last 6.5 years, I've been doing a series of talks and workshops, and I run online training programs. And I've had now over 12,500 people come through those talks and workshops and things. And I kept seeing the same thing. People would get clear on their big potential and get excited about their dreams and their goals. I'd help them get clear. And then for a few weeks, they'd be in like, woohoo, and be taking action. And then a few weeks later, people hit that fear. So as much as they go into expansion about their potential, they suddenly go into contraction of like, oh. And so I then started identifying what those fears were, and over the last 6.5 years have really got down to what I call the 7 deadly fears, and I see them come time and time again. And these are actually irrational fears. So we have rational fear as human beings, and rational fear is when our actual survival is in threat. So if someone's got a gun to your head and you feel frightened, that's rational fear because you're about to die. But every single other fear that we have is irrational. And it's these irrational fears that stop us from living our dreams and living our full potential. And there's 7 of them. The first is the power of authority or not fulfilling the wishes of authority, which is why the police work in some countries and don't in others. So I don't know if you have this. I certainly had this when I was growing up, where you get called into the headmaster's office and you suddenly feel frightened. Or I have this now, if I'm driving my car and I see a roadblock, I suddenly start to get frightened, and I start to go through in my mind all of the naughty things that I might have done, even though I haven't done anything naughty.
Absolutely, I can relate to that.
Yeah, so you're like, what have I done, even though you haven't done anything? And that's that fear.
Okay.
And it's an irrational fear, and it's based on the authority figure. What will the authority figure think? The second fear that stops people is, I don't know enough. And I see this often in my work as a fairy godmother. People come up with these big dreams and goals. I want to be an interior decorator, or I want to be an artist, or I want to start my own business, and then they come up again, but do I really know enough? And the most incredible thing about not knowing enough is that people often think that they've got to go and study, let me go and study to find out more.
Yeah.
But as human beings, we only ever learn through experience. You can study and get some theory and get some knowledge and get some insights, yes, but studying is never, ever going to make up for experience.
Yeah.
And as human beings, we only ever learn through experience. Like, how many of us, when we went to our first job ever, actually knew exactly what we were doing?
Wow, yeah, if I think about my first sort of interview process. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, you went into what was your first job, Kim?
I actually worked at an NGO in Greenpoint in the marketing department, and I'd come from a BA English and Politics, so I literally had no idea.
You had no idea what you were doing. So you got like thrown into the deep end.
Yeah.
I'm sure your eyes were like wide. I mean, how did they hire us? In those first jobs that we ever went into, how did we ever get hired?
No idea.
We blagged our way through it. We got in, and your eyes were wide, and someone was training you. And you made loads of mistakes in the beginning, and you didn't quite know what you were doing. And you looked at this person who was training you, and you would say to them, wow, how do you know how to do all this stuff?
Absolutely.
And they'd be like, it's easy.
Yeah.
And then after a few months, after crying your eyes out, thinking, how am I ever going to get my head around this? You were doing it. And a few months later or a year later, someone new came into your organization, and it was your job to train them. And they were all wide-eyed and bushy-tailed, and they were looking at you saying, Kim, how do you know how to do all this stuff? And you were like, it's easy. And that's what happens. When we start taking and embarking on this path of living your dreams, you're never going to know enough. Never. And if you wait until you know enough, you're never going to start. All you can do is take step by step and keep asking for help. If you don't know, put up your hand. Ask people. We have this amazing resource called Google in this day and age, right? So easy to find the information that you want. So easy to find the help that you want. So don't let that be the reason to stop you.
But now, is this an issue of confidence, do you think? Because then also it's something that starts or must start at a very young age. As
Very
well,
much so.
Or when you're addressing it, to start at a very young age.
Very much so, yeah. And so I would, really say to parents, a lot of times parents give us the information of like, oh, you're not clever enough. Or teachers are like, oh, you're silly at maths, you're never going to be good in business. Or, I do a money magic program. And a lot of people who come on my money magic program, they're concerned because they're not good with figures. So how am I ever going to be good with money because I'm not good with figures? And these are things that we've been brought up to believe about ourselves. So yes, it is a confidence thing, but it then plays into this fear. And you can learn anything in life.
I think one of the most important points, I realized it a while back, that, everything that you see, shops, businesses, lampposts, it all started with somebody having an idea and then having the confidence to follow that idea.
Everything starts with a dream. Everything starts with a dream. And that's why they're so powerful.
Okay, so that's the second one. And then the third, the threat of failure.
Yes, this is one of my big fears. It comes up for me a lot, and that is the fear of failure. Sometimes for people, it's the corollary, it's the fear of success, but most often it's the fear of failure. What happens if I do something and it fails? What happens if I start this business and it doesn't work out? The interesting thing about the fear of failure is that because you're in such fear of failure, you don't take any action, and so you consistently then still feel like you're a failure. So it's almost like a catch-22 situation. So that's that fear.
Okay, well, we're talking the 7 deadly fears with Fairy Godmother, and the number to call is 0892 10 2010, 0892 10 2010. Well, success also means different things to different people as well. And I think that's something that's important to acknowledge there with the threat of failure.
Very much so. And so for some people, what looks like success or what looks like failure is completely different to what other people. So really, this fear comes up depending on what your perception of failure or success is. I mean, there are wonderful books about failure that talk about failing forward. Failing is absolutely paramount. You have to fail. I mean, imagine as human beings, if the first time we ever took a step to walk, we thought that we were failures. I mean, none of us would ever be walking. Children fail thousands and thousands and thousands of times. And in fact, if you actually watch children, it's interesting because they haven't got the stigma around failure. They will make mistakes and make mistakes and make mistakes and make mistakes. And they realize that that's just part of learning.
And I think that's also something that you've obviously tried to encapsulate in your work as well, in terms of almost going back to a sort of childhood sort of way of playing, also accessing, because you're sitting here with your fairy wings and your wand. Is that something also that you can use to...
Very much so. In fact, I do that a lot in my workshops, in my talks. I make sure that they're highly experiential, creative. And a number of people say that my dream mapping and goal setting workshop is like going back to nursery school, because I get people to rip out of magazines and cut and paste, and they're collaging and really use tools to take us back into, as children, we understand the essence of who we are. We understand our gifts. And it's so important. As adults, we get so stuck in a rut and we get so serious being serious.
Absolutely. And I think it's also it's so important to have that practical advice as well.
Very much so.
Especially in these days where, like you said, Google, you've got access to so much information and you've got people telling you things all the time. It's good to get your hands dirty.
Very much so. And it's great to actually use the practical tips and tricks. In fact, on my website, Kim, I have a number of free downloads for people to use. They can really download the audio versions. Some are guided meditations. Some are me just talking and giving them practical tips to use on a day-to-day basis to help them either overcome their fears or live their dreams. So if they'd like to go onto the website, it's very simple, fairygodmother.co.za.
Brilliant. Well, let's go to the fourth fear, it seems.
Yes.
Money.
This is a big fear. And that is, what happens? How am I going to pay the bills? And I see this a lot with people wanting to step out of their corporate lives and go into following their passions. How can I possibly be an artist? How am I ever going to pay the bills? And it happens a lot into professions that are more artistic or creative. There's a terrible lie, Kim, that pervades our society, and we're taught it as children growing up. And as a fairy godmother, it's one of my missions in life to actually get rid and eliminate this lie. And the lie is that you can't do what you love and make huge amounts of money doing it. And if you look at the wealthiest people in the world, the absolute billionaires, the truth is they do exactly what they love. And that's why they make huge amounts of money doing it. So it's about really getting over this fear and getting over the lie and realizing that if you are passionate about something, you will bring an element of your own gift, your own potential, your own persistence, and the money will flow. If you look at any profession in the world, there is someone making millions of dollars doing it. Whether it's hairdressing, whether it's art, whether it's driving cars, whatever it is, there is someone making millions doing it. So if you're sitting there thinking, oh my goodness, but how am I ever going to make money? Again, go to Google. Google's my best friend. Go and Google and say, millionaire who is a hairdresser. And you'll find loads that'll just say, oh wow, I can really do this.
And apart from that, I mean, when you say go and follow your dream, and I don't think you're asking people to just jump straight in. Is there a practical way that you guide people to sort of make a plan to make it a reality?
Very much so. It's the thing that I do in my dream mapping and goal setting workshop. It's one thing to be clear on the dream and goal. And what I find is a number of people who come to my workshop have absolutely no idea what their dreams or goals are. They've got stuck in a rut. So for them, the workshop really gets them into clarity about the dream and goal. Second group of people who come have a different idea every day. So it's like, today I want to do this. And then the next day it's like, oh, what about that idea? And for them, the workshop gives them real focus around, okay, which is the big one to be tackling? And for some people, they're already clear on a big dream or goal and they're just stuck somewhere along the way in reaching it. And I always say, Kim, my wand is not just for wand waving, it's also for wand whacking. I give people practical tools to wand whack them into action. And it's really about giving people practical step-by-steps, like, okay, you're clear on the big dream and goal? Right, here are some, so they walk away from the workshop with some practical application that they can start moving into. But knowing that they're not going to know everything, and knowing that fear is going to come up, and how to overcome those fears.
I think also one of the things, especially with people who have children who want to sort of change their career course completely or whatever, they worry about they're supporting their children as well. But it's also about being a role model, I'd imagine.
Very much so. I mean, how many of us have been brought up in households where our parents have been desperately unhappy in their careers and consequently desperately unhappy as people because they're not living out their full potential. And the greatest gift that you can give your children is you living out your full potential. How many parents look to their children to live out their own dreams and goals? I mean, that in itself is a destructive pattern.
Well, I'll give out the number again. It's 0892 10 20 10, 0892 10 20 10. And moving on to fear 5, losing respect.
Yes, that's loss of respect of a loved one, particularly. And this was my big fear in becoming a fairy godmother. I was really concerned about what my mother was going to think about me being a fairy godmother and wearing these wings and waving this wand. And she did think that I'd gone quite crazy. And often people will have this around, what are their husbands or wives going to think? What are their siblings going to think? Oh, I can't do that.
But before you've even done it as well.
Exactly. And often the people closest to you will think you're a bit crazy, particularly if it's a big dream or goal. They will think, wow, because you're stepping out of your paradigm. But ultimately, in my own journey, I've seen that people now, 6 years on, look at it and go, wow, you've inspired me. And it's really inspiring to see people living their dreams and goals.
I think also there must be people worry what other people think, not only loved ones these days, and that gets in the way, I'd imagine.
Very much so. In fact, it brings us to our sixth fear, which is a rejection by society. So you're not only afraid of what your loved ones think, but you're afraid of rejection by society as a whole. Often people say to me, geez, you wear your fairy wings and you walk out, and you'll see me. I'll be in shopping centers or I'll be wherever wearing my wings, and people say, that's very courageous. Aren't you scared? And it's like, well, I'm doing this for me and it makes my soul light up, so I don't really care what anyone else thinks. But it takes a lot to get through that. The first few times I wore wings, I did feel a little bit silly. Definitely.
To get over yourself, I suppose.
Absolutely, and it's been such a powerful message for me to get over myself. Because we all think that everyone else is thinking about us. I think Eleanor Roosevelt has a wonderful quote. She said, if people thought as much about us as we think that they do, right, they're more thinking about what other people are thinking of them.
Completely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. Well, the seventh fear. The fear of, I've written here the fear of splat, because when I read it, I thought splat was such a good word to put in there.
This is the fear of ill health or lack of physical well-being. And this is the fear that people have around particularly things like, that are going to be around your body. So adrenaline sports junkies don't have this fear. They don't have the fear of ill health or lack of physical well-being. In fact, last night I was watching a wonderful documentary about big wave riders. So these guys that ride this incredibly huge surfing waves. And they were doing this documentary about these Australian brothers that literally, ride into these huge waves. And just I would never do that, because the fear of my own, body and hurting myself and potentially dying is just, and they just didn't have that fear. And it was just so amazing to watch people getting to that level of being able to overcome their fear around their physicality.
Do you think it's important to do that when you're sort of scared of heights, or you have a fear like that, to actually force yourself, or is there a sort of fine balance you need to sort of address there? It
depends how, how much it stops you. So for me, as an example, skydiving would not be my thing. And I just get that. But that doesn't stop me from living my everyday life. Now, if my dream or goal was to be a pilot and I had a fear of heights, then do you need to get over it? Absolutely. But it depends in context of what your dreams and goals are. But if it's stopping you, if the fear is stopping you from taking action, if the fear is stopping you from doing something that you really want to do, then you need to overcome it. Absolutely.
So these are the 7 deadly fears that you've, in your work, sort of pinpointed that get in the way of people moving forward with how they want to live and what they want to do.
Yes.
So I'm hearing it's a lot about changing habits, really.
Very much so. And it's about changing your mindset. And so the best exercise that I've come across for overcoming fear, Kim, is the first step is to realize that you're in fear. Awareness is always the first step towards transformation. So the first step, awareness. Now, how would you know that you're in fear? A number of people will say, I'll have sweaty palms, I'll have a beating heart. But it's only when we're in heightened stages of fear that we actually feel that way. You are in fear if you're not taking action. If you want something and you have a big dream or goal and you're not taking action, you are in fear. So the first step is to go through these 7 fears that I've listed and find out and figure out what is the fear. So for those of you that are listening that haven't written them down, you can go and find them on my website, fairygodmother.co.za, and there's a list of these fears and more detailed explanation of each of them. And you go down that list and you go, okay, I'm really afraid of failure. And sometimes it might be a combination of 2 or 3 of the fears. I'm afraid of what my husband's going to think, and I'm afraid of failure. That's why I'm not starting my own business. And then you do a written exercise. And I highly recommend you do this as a written exercise, Kim, because the fear, it lives in the head and it's so clever. If you try to do the exercise in your head, the fear will rationalize itself. So you write down, if I take this action, whatever the action is, what's the best thing that can happen and what's the worst thing that can happen? And you'll find when you see it in black and white, when you actually write it down, the worst thing that can happen is never as bad as the fear that you feel. And the worst thing that can happen is often the status quo. It's often the way things are right now. And a lot of people also think that, the action that they have to take is a big action. And this is one of the things that I address in my workshops. Your big journey, your big potential, your big dream and goal is made up of lots of little steps. And it's about taking step by small step by small step by small step by small step. And that's how you reach your full potential.
And on that note, I think I'm going to give out, it's www.fairygodmother.com.
No, fairygodmother.co.za.
.co.za. Brilliant. And people can find out more and connect with you on that website as
well.
They
can, and they can also connect with me on Facebook, Fairy Godmother, and Twitter, @FairyGodmother. They can get words of wisdom and some wand-waving madness every day on Twitter.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Donna, for joining me in studio. I feel energized just having you and your fairy wings and your color and your wand. So thank you very much for coming in, and I hope that people do get in touch with you, because I think it's really important to start talking about these kinds of things. And I think I'll leave you with that, with a Nelson Mandela quote. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. I think that's quite a good thing to leave it at today. So
my favorite quote.
So that's it from Otherwise Team today. If you would like to get in touch, feel free to drop us a line on otherwise@safm.co.za or visit our Facebook page. That's Otherwise on SAFM. Thanks to the team today, Hazel Makazeni, Derek Fordyce, and I'm Kim Winter.